The winter the neighbors laughed was the winter the sky forgot how to be blue. It came down in sheets of iron-gray snow, in winds that clawed at doors and rattled bones, in nights so cold that breath turned to frost before a prayer could leave your lips. Her name was Eliza Harper, and by the time the first heavy storm rolled across the valley, she had already buried a husband, sold half her land to pay debts, and learned that loneliness can be louder than thunder. The cabin she lived in had been built by her husband's hands, strong pine logs, chinked with mud and hope, but hope doesn't stop the cold. The wind found its way through every crack. The fireplace smoked more than it warmed. And when the temperature dropped low enough, even the water in the bucket beside her bed formed a thin skin of ice. The neighbors pitied her at first. Then they advised her. Then they mocked her. Because one morning, as frost painted the windows white and the valley men gathered near the well, they saw Eliza hauling stones, heavy, round back-breaking stones, into her cabin. Day after day she dragged them from the edge of the creek, her skirts muddied, her knuckles split, her breath ragged. "What are you building, Eliza?" Old Mr. Hargrove had called out, laughter tucked in his beard. "A castle to keep the cold away?" Others joined in. "Maybe she's lost her senses. Grief does that." "A stone tent inside a wooden cabin? Foolishness." She didn't answer them. She kept working. Inside her cabin, she cleared the center of the room and began stacking the stones in a circle. Layer upon layer, carefully fitted, leaning inward until the structure curved like the shell of a great turtle. It rose slowly, awkward at first, then purposeful. She left a narrow opening near the base, another smaller vent higher up. She mixed clay with ash and packed it between the stones. By lantern light she worked, long after the valley fell silent. She had seen something like it once as a child, when her father had taken her west for a trading trip. A trapper had shown them a stone shelter built within a hut, a heat trap. He called it fire heat stone, the man had said, tapping the curved wall. Stone holds heat. Heat holds life. The memory had come back to her on a night when she had woken shaking so violently she thought her bones might crack. She had realized then that the cabin's wide fireplace was a liar. It devoured wood and gave back smoke. What she needed was something that would swallow fire and breathe warmth slowly, steadily, like a living thing. So she built her stone tent. The laughter outside grew sharper as the dome grew taller. Children pressed their faces to her window to stare at the strange gray mound taking shape in the center of the room. "She's building her own tomb," someone muttered once, not knowing she could hear. Eliza heard everything, but she also felt something else growing beneath. The sting of humiliation, a stubborn certainty. She finished the dome on a bitter afternoon when the wind howled so fiercely it bent the trees like bowing men. The structure stood nearly to her shoulder, thick and solid, with a small crawl-in opening at the bottom and a narrow smoke vent carved through the top stones. She let it dry for 2 days. On the third night, she carried in an armful of split logs, crouched before the opening and struck a match. The first fire burned small. She fed it carefully, watching how the flames licked the stone walls. Smoke curled upward and slipped through the vent as she had prayed it would. The stones began to darken, then to glow faintly. Hours passed. The wind outside shrieked. Inside the dome, the fire roared brighter, and the stones drank it in. When she finally let the flames die down and sealed the lower opening with a flat slab of rock, the dome radiated warmth, deep, penetrating warmth that seeped into the cabin floor, into her hands, into the marrow of her bones. She lay down beside it that night and did not wake shivering. Morning came and the warmth remained. Not blazing, not scorching, steady, alive. She laughed then, softly to herself. The neighbors continued to mock her creation, calling it Eliza's folly. But she no longer listened. Each day she fed the stone tent once, sometimes twice if the cold demanded it. Each night it gave back what she had given it, multiplied by patience. The cabin changed. Frost no longer claimed the windows. The water bucket stayed liquid. Even her breath ceased to fog the air. She began sleeping deeply for the first time since her husband's death. And yet the true test had not come. It arrived in January, riding on a storm so vicious that even the men who had laughed nailed extra boards across their doors. The sky turned the color of bruised steel. Snow fell in blinding sheets. The wind did not howl, it screamed. Roof shingles tore loose. Trees snapped like matchsticks. By dusk the valley had vanished beneath white fury. Eliza stood at her window and felt a flicker of fear. She had wood stacked. She had water stored. She had her stone tent glowing strong. But storms had a way of finding weaknesses no one expected, as darkness swallowed the world. The temperature plummeted further than she had ever known. The wind forced its way through cracks she had stuffed with cloth. The cabin walls creaked under the strain. She fed the stone tent heavily, letting the fire rage inside until the stones pulsed with stored heat. Then she sealed it and sat beside it, wrapped in blankets. Hours passed. A thunderous crack split the night. The old chimney of the original fireplace collapsed, sending debris crashing to the floor. Snow blasted inward through the gap. The main source of heat the cabin had once relied on was gone. Outside, other chimneys fell too. Other fires died in gusts of merciless wind. Eliza's heart pounded, but the dome beside her glowed like a captured sun. The warmth held. The air inside the cabin remained breathable, steady. She pressed her palm against the stone and whispered gratitude. Through the long night, the storm battered her home. Snow forced itself under the door. Ice formed along the broken chimney hole. But the stone tent continued releasing its slow, faithful heat. When dawn finally bled pale light across the wreckage of the valley, Eliza was alive, tired, shaken, but alive. She opened her door to a world buried waist-deep in snow. Smoke did not rise from many cabins. The laughter from weeks before was gone. In its place hung silence, and the fragile understanding that survival sometimes belongs not to the strongest, but to the ones willing to be ridiculed for trying something different. And this was only the beginning of what her strange stone tent would prove. If this story is pulling you in, if you can feel the cold and the courage rising together, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Because stories like this, stories of grit, wisdom, and quiet strength deserve to be remembered. The morning after the great storm, the valley looked like a graveyard carved from ice. Snow had swallowed fences. Barn roofs sagged dangerously. Smoke rose from only a handful of homes. Eliza stepped carefully through the drifts, her boots crunching against the frozen crust, her breath steady in the calm that follows catastrophe. She moved first toward the Hargroves' cabin, the very place where laughter had rung loudest. She knocked, and after a long pause, the door creaked open. Inside, the air was sharp with cold. Their fireplace had gone out sometime in the night. When the chimney collapsed, Mrs. Hargrove's lips were tinged blue. "We can't get it lit again," she whispered. Eliza didn't scold. She didn't remind them of their jokes. She simply said, "Come with me." One by one, she gathered them, Hargroves, the Millers, even old Mr. Thompson, who had declared her mad. She led them through the snow to her cabin. When she opened the door, a wave of warmth met the frozen air outside. They stepped in cautiously, eyes widening at the dome in the center of the room. It stood solid and silent, radiating life. "It's still warm?" someone breathed. "It never stopped," Eliza answered. She showed them how she fed it, how the stones held heat long after flames died, how the vent drew smoke safely upward. The men circled it, touching the rock surface, disbelief melting into understanding. That day her cabin became a refuge. They huddled around the stone tent, while the valley dug itself out. From beneath winter's wrath, children slept against its curved wall. Water thawed beside it. Soup simmered slowly in its steady warmth. The laughter that had once echoed now returned in a different tone, softer, grateful, humbled. But the true proof of the stone tent's power came 3 nights later, when a second wave of cold descended without warning. The temperature dropped so violently that livestock froze where they stood. Cabins without stable heat turned deadly. One by one, families abandoned their failing hearths and trudged toward the only place they knew warmth would endure. Eliza's small cabin filled beyond capacity. 20 souls pressed inside, fear in their eyes. "It won't hold us all," someone murmured. Eliza looked at the dome, her dome, and felt a flicker of doubt for the first time. But she remembered the trapper's words. Heat holds life. She fed the fire carefully, allowing the stones to absorb the blaze until they shimmered faintly red at their seams. Then she sealed it tight. The hours that followed were silent except for the wind's distant scream. Inside, the warmth radiated evenly, wrapping around every body in the room. No smoke choked the air. No sparks threatened the wooden walls. Just steady breathing heat. The children slept. The elders stopped trembling. Even the strongest men lowered their heads in quiet awe. At dawn, frost covered the outside of the cabin like armor, but inside, life endured. Word spread quickly once the roads cleared. People came not to laugh, but to learn. Eliza showed them how to choose stones, how to stack them inward, how to seal gaps with clay and ash. Within weeks, similar domes began rising inside cabins across the valley. What had been mockery became movement. What had been scorn became respect. The valley survived the harshest winter in memory, not because of wealth or strength, but because one woman refused to bow to ridicule. Months later, when spring finally softened the earth and green pushed bravely through thawing soil, the neighbors gathered outside Eliza's cabin. Mr. Hargrove stepped forward. "Hut and Hunt, we were wrong," he said simply. She smiled, not triumphant, not bitter, just steady. "Sometimes," she replied. "Being laughed at is the first sign you're building something worth finishing." The stone tent remained in her cabin long after the snow melted. It stood as proof that wisdom can wear humble clothes, that courage can look like stubbornness, and that survival often begins with one person willing to endure embarrassment for the sake of belief. And here's the truth that matters most. The thing they mocked became the very thing that saved them, not just from cold, but from pride. So if you're building something others don't understand, if you're holding on to an idea that feels strange or different, remember Eliza and her stone tent. Sometimes the world laughs right before it learns. And if this story inspired you, if it reminded you that resilience can change destinies, make sure you subscribe to the channel, because here we tell stories of ordinary people who choose courage over comfort, and who prove that the quietest strength often burns the longest.